Welcome to the Pod-Key summary of Ottawa Senators. Ottawa's hockey story is a lot bigger than one franchise or one era. It starts with the city helping build the sport's early institutions, runs through a wildly dominant and wildly rough Silver Seven dynasty, peaks again with the NHL's first dynasty in the 1920s, and then crashes into the very practical problem of being a small market before anybody really used that phrase. And along the way, you get the birth of the Stanley Cup, a challenger traveling from the Yukon by basically every form of transportation available in 1905, and a long argument over how many championships Ottawa should actually claim. It's a very Canadian mix of legend, bureaucracy, grit, and accounting. The Ottawa Hockey Club was founded in 1883 after Halder Kirby, Jack Kerr, and Frank Jenkins watched hockey at the Montreal Winter Carnival and decided they needed that game back home. That made it Ontario's first organized hockey club, and Ottawa didn't just field teams, it helped shape the sport itself. The club was involved in creating the Amateur Hockey Association of Canada in 1886 and the Ontario Hockey Association in 1890, which meant Ottawa was an institutional force before professional leagues even existed. One early fight had surprisingly long aftershocks. In 1894, Ottawa clashed with the OHA over where the championship final should be played, and that dispute created a lasting regional split. Ottawa area teams still fall under Hockey Eastern Ontario rather than the OHA. Ottawa was also close to the Stanley Cup story from the start. Lord Stanley attended games there, chose former Senator P.D. Ross as a Cup trustee, and announced the new Dominion Challenge Trophy at a dinner honoring Ottawa's 1892 champions. So Ottawa wasn't just competing for the Cup later on, it was part of the world that brought the thing into existence. From 1903 to 1906, Ottawa's Silver Seven held the Stanley Cup through a string of challenge series against teams from different leagues. They beat Winnipeg, Toronto, Brandon, Dawson City, Queen's University, and Smiths Falls. The nickname needs a little translation, because it sounds mysterious now. After the 1903 Cup win, the players were given silver nuggets instead of cash, partly because paying them openly could have threatened their amateur status, and teams at the time used 7 men on the ice. Silver nuggets, 7 players. Silver Seven. The star of the group was Frank McGee, who is one of those early hockey figures who sounds almost too intense to be real. He'd already lost an eye playing hockey, still came back, and then scored 135 goals in just 45 games. He was only 5'6", which makes the scoring even more absurd. And in the famous 1905 rout of Dawson City, he scored 14 goals in a single game. That stood as a major senior hockey record. That Dawson City challenge in 1905 became one of the great stories in early hockey, partly because of the hockey and partly because of the trip. The Yukon team got to Ottawa by dog sled, bicycle, train, steamer, and then more trains, covering thousands of miles and arriving just 2 days before the first game. Ottawa still refused to postpone the series, which feels very on brand for the era. Friendly hospitality was not exactly the leading value here. The first game was relatively manageable for a while. Then Ottawa won 9-2. The second game turned into a 23-2 demolition, with McGee scoring those 14 goals. The series had all the extra early hockey weirdness too: stick attacks, complaints about offside goals, and one attempted dropkick of the Stanley Cup over the frozen Rideau Canal. There's also a real question about whether Dawson City had fully earned the challenge on sporting grounds. The team hadn't won a recognized senior championship, and the path to the series may have leaned heavily on political and personal connections, including organizer Joe Boyle's ties to Interior Minister Clifford Sifton and former Ottawa player Weldy Young's link to trustee P.D. Ross. The Silver Seven were admired for how dominant they were, but they were also notorious for violence. And it's worth saying that plainly, because early hockey could be vicious in ways that go beyond modern roughness. In a 1904 challenge against Winnipeg, Ottawa reportedly injured 7 of Winnipeg's 9 players. Contemporary accounts describe systematic slashing, tripping, cross-checking, and going after opponents' hands and wrists. By 1907, an Ottawa-Montreal brawl escalated into players being hit in the head and face, plus arrests and fines. League officials still didn't impose much meaningful discipline, which tells you a lot about the culture. Incapacitating an opponent was often treated as a legitimate tactic, not some horrifying breakdown of the game. Ottawa's influence on hockey strategy lasted in a less alarming way too. Its defense-first style was effective enough that the NHL eventually changed rules in 1924, requiring defensemen to leave the defensive zone once the puck had gone out. Ottawa came roaring back in the 1920s with the Super Six, which the NHL recognizes as its first dynasty. The Senators won Stanley Cups in 1920, 1921, 1923, and 1927, and they finished first in the regular season 7 times. What's striking is how sustainable they were. Ottawa kept turning a strong local talent base into another wave of stars. In 1924, they traded away Hall of Famers Clint Benedict and Punch Broadbent, which sounds like the beginning of a decline, and then replaced them with Alex Connell and Hooley Smith, who also became Hall of Famers. That's not luck, that's a pipeline. The individual numbers were ridiculous for the time. Punch Broadbent scored in 16 straight games, a record that still stood in 2020. And Alex Connell posted 15 shutouts in 36 games in 1925 and 1926, then later set an NHL record with 6 straight shutouts lasting 460 minutes and 49 seconds. Goalies today would probably like a quiet afternoon after hearing that. The original Senators didn't really fall apart because they forgot how to play. They got squeezed economically. Ottawa had about 110,000 residents in the 1931 census, roughly 1/5 the size of Toronto, and that market difference mattered more and more as travel costs rose and games against American teams drew weak attendance. Even after winning the 1927 Stanley Cup, the club was chasing bigger gates by playing home games in Detroit, Atlantic City, and Boston. That's a pretty clear sign. The local math wasn't working. The team also sold stars to stay afloat, including Hooley Smith, Cy Denneny, and King Clancy. Clancy sailed to Toronto in 1930, brought a record $35,000 Canadian dollars. Ottawa asked to suspend operations for the 1931-32 season, looked at moving to Chicago, Toronto, and Baltimore, and finally relocated to St. Louis in 1934. That version became the St. Louis Eagles, lasted 1 season, finished last, and then had its franchise bought back and suspended by the NHL. So even the escape plan didn't really escape. The championship count gets messy because early Stanley Cup competition didn't work like the modern playoff system. It ran on challenge rules, and that changes how some seasons are remembered. Ottawa won Cup challenges in 1906 and 1910, but it was no longer the cup holder at the end of those seasons. The Hockey Hall of Fame recognizes Ottawa as a 1906 champion, but not a 1910 champion. The NHL recognizes both. The current Senators originally honored only 9 original team championships, then added banners for 1906 and 1910 in 2003, and now list 11. So even the official memory took a while to settle down. There's another twist here too. The organization outlived its NHL franchise. A senior Senators team kept going in Quebec leagues after 1934, won Allen Cups in 1943 and 1949, and lasted until 1954. When the modern Senators arrived in 1992, they took the old nickname and the black, red, and white colors, but they kept the records separate. It's heritage with an asterisk, which is honestly very hockey. Ottawa's place in hockey history is unusually deep. It helped build the game, dominated it in 2 separate eras, and then became a case study in how even a great team can run into the hard limits of geography and money. And if nothing else, this story leaves you with one solid image. A team from Dawson City crossing a continent to challenge for the Stanley Cup, only to run into Frank McGee and a very unforgiving Ottawa. Early hockey was not subtle. This episode was generated by Podkey. Create your own at podkey.fm.